You know that strange ache nobody ever taught you to name? The one that appears right after you finally start becoming yourself. It feels like growth, but somehow it lands like betrayal. One day, nothing explodes, and yet everything inside you shifts. The same people still smile, still talk, still know your history, but somehow they no longer reach the part of you evolving. That is the quiet pain of outgrowing people you still love. And if this hits hard, it's probably because you're living it. At first, the distance is almost too subtle to notice. Conversations begin repeating like old songs drained of meaning. The jokes are unchanged, but your laughter arrives one beat late. Your dreams enter the room, and the room turns strangely quiet. So you start editing yourself before anyone even asks you to. You soften your language to avoid sounding too different now. You downplay your progress so nobody feels left behind. You make your hunger look smaller than it really is. Not because you're arrogant or secretly think you're above them, because you don't want your evolution to feel like rejection. That's where the guilt begins, and it begins almost politely, not with drama, but with careful self-erasure disguised as kindness. Psychologists say, guilt often appears when identity changes faster than attachment. In simple words, your soul moves, but your loyalty stays behind. So now you're split between two powerful instincts at once. One voice says grow, even if it costs comfort. The other says, don't make anyone around you uncomfortable. And that invisible war drains more energy than people realize. You start asking dangerous questions only in the dark. Am I changing too much for the people who know me? Am I becoming harder to recognize and harder to love? Am I leaving people behind just by telling the truth? But the real reason this hurts is deeper than guilt. You're not just losing company or conversation or shared routines. You're losing the version of yourself that once belonged there. Behavioral science explains that humans protect familiar patterns like survival itself. Even unhealthy dynamics can feel safe when they stay predictable. That's why growth often triggers fear instead of pure pride. You're not broken for feeling torn between freedom and loyalty. You're responding exactly how human nature was designed to respond. The first shift is mental, almost invisible, but deeply irreversible. You begin seeing patterns you once excused as personality. You notice avoidance dressed up as humor and easygoing charm. You notice envy hiding inside polite support and forced smiles. You notice some people loved your wounds more than your healing. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. Silence changes shape, and even presence changes its meaning. History stops feeling like proof that the bond still fits. Suddenly, memory is warm, but the connection feels colder. That realization is brutal because nobody did anything dramatic enough. There is no villain, no explosion, no clean reason to blame. Things simply stopped fitting the person you are becoming now. And this is where most people quietly betray themselves. They stay loyal to a version of life already expired. They show up halfway, hoping half-truths can save whole bonds. They speak carefully, like honesty might break the room. They avoid the subjects that make them feel fully alive. Studies show emotional suppression doesn't preserve connection. It slowly corrodes it. You can fake belonging for a season, maybe even years, but your nervous system always knows when you're performing. That's why some conversations leave you strangely drained now. That's why familiar rooms suddenly feel emotionally expensive to enter. That's why being understood feels harder than simply being liked. Because being liked only asks for adaptation and surface harmony. Being understood requires truth, and truth disturbs old arrangements. Truth exposes how much of the bond depended on your silence. This is the second shift, and it changes everything quietly. You stop bonding through pain and start bonding through purpose. That sounds healthy, mature, even admirable from the outside. But to the old dynamic, it feels like disloyalty. You used to connect through shared frustration and mutual stagnation. Now you're asking how to break the pattern for good. You used to laugh at the wound and call it personality. Now you're trying to heal it, even when healing isolates you. You used to survive together without questioning the structure. Now you're trying to evolve, and evolution makes old circles nervous. And not everyone actually wants evolution, even if they praise it. Human behavior clings to comfort, even when comfort is suffocating. So when you grow, you become a mirror without trying, and mirrors make people uncomfortable because they reveal avoided truths, especially the people who preferred the older, quieter version of you. The version that needed less and asked for almost nothing. The version that questioned less and tolerated more than necessary. The version that made their own stillness feel completely normal. Let that sink in, because this part changes everything. Sometimes people don't miss you as deeply as they claim. They miss access to the version of you they understood. The version they could predict, manage, and emotionally organize. That's not cruelty. And it isn't always conscious either. That's psychology, behavior, and human nature working in the dark. Familiarity creates emotional permission, and your growth removes that permission. Suddenly, your boundaries feel rude to people who benefited before. Suddenly, your ambition feels threatening to people married to repetition. Suddenly, your peace looks distant to people addicted to chaos. And this is where guilt starts mutating into grief. Not grief for a breakup, but grief for a slow disappearance. You miss the inside jokes and the effortless late-night calls. You miss the future you once assumed would include them. You miss who you were when belonging felt simple and automatic. Invisible grief is the hardest kind of pain to explain, because nothing clearly broke, and still something important disappeared. And your heart keeps trying to revive what time already changed. Here's what makes this guilt feel heavier than ordinary sadness. Your body hears a distance and quietly translates it as danger. Long before modern psychology explained attachment, belonging meant literal survival. To be cast out once meant hunger, cold, and death. So when growth threatens connection, your system reads it as loss. That is why you second-guess yourself after every breakthrough. That is why success can feel heavier than failure sometimes. Failure keeps the tribe comfortable. Growth changes the tribe itself, and change reveals who loved your essence and who loved your role. Silence is data. This is the third shift, and it cuts deep. You realize peace that requires self-betrayal is not peace at all. It is postponement, dressed in soft language and fake harmony. It is emotional debt collecting interest in the dark. The more you shrink, the more resentment grows without permission. You start listening less, even when you still care deeply. You start showing up physically while disappearing emotionally inside. Not because your heart turned cold or superior or cruel, because your spirit is tired of living in reverse. Emotional intelligence means knowing when loyalty becomes self-abandonment. It means understanding compassion does not require self. You can love people and still release the old contract. You can honor memories without forcing a future that no longer fits. You can wish them well without returning to who you were. And yes, some people will call that distance or arrogance. But distance is not always rejection, and discomfort is not harm. Sometimes distance is truth finally refusing to wear a costume. This is the fourth shift, the one that frees you slowly. You stop asking, how do I keep everyone with me? And start asking, what does honesty cost? And is it worth it? Usually, the answer is terrifying, lonely, and absolutely necessary. Because the alternative is quieter, but far more destructive. You keep the circle, but lose your center. You keep the peace, but lose your voice. You keep the history, but lose your future. So if you're feeling guilty, don't rush to silence it. Ask what this feeling is trying to teach you. Maybe it is proof that you still care deeply. Maybe it is evidence your heart stayed soft while standards rose. Maybe it is the emotional residue of empathy colliding with evil. And maybe that pain is not punishment for changing. Maybe it's initiation into a more honest life. The truth is, not everyone who started with you can stay. But the people meant for your next chapter won't ask you to shrink. They will meet your depth with depth and your honesty with honesty. They will recognize your growth without making you apologize for it. And one day this realization will land with strange peace. You did not lose people by becoming more fully yourself. You revealed who could walk beside the truth of you. And that is not betrayal. That is the price of becoming real.